Hello everyone and welcome to the final video of this IELTS speaking course dedicated to word formation. Now we're going back to lexical resource in this lesson, which is another of the 4 marking criteria on the speaking exam, and we're going to go into how you can make vocabulary a bit more systematic and therefore easier to learn in parts. And without further ado, let's get into how we can do this, and I will share my screen with you now. Okay, so when talking about word formation, it's probably a good idea to start with affixes. And affixes can be broken down into 2 groups. We've got the first here on the left, which are prefixes, and then on the right we have suffixes, and then I have a definition for each of them. So prefixes are letters added to the beginning of a word that usually come with their own meaning. And then with suffixes, they are letters added to the end of the word to change its form. Okay, so let's start with prefixes. Now I say that they usually come with their own meaning, but that's more this group down here. And before we get into those, let's start with prefixes that give an opposite or a negative meaning to English words. So the most common, I suppose, would be the word un. But unfortunately, this is one of 3 prefixes that don't really have a good general rule, unfortunately. There's no real rule for when you would use un, dis, or in to give an opposite or negative meaning. And even within some word families, they can actually change. So, for example, the adjective comfortable is used with un. So to give the opposite, you need to use the word uncomfortable. However, the noun is comfort, and you cannot say uncomfort. The negative to that would be discomfort. All right. So, like I say, even within word families, this can be quite tricky. Now, the word in, sometimes you see it before words beginning with A and C, like inaccessible or incapable, for example. But again, there's no real good rule because there are some other exceptions to that. Now, I do have a few examples that do have a general rule, though, and they are the 3 below it. So we've got IL, IR, and IM. So IL usually comes before words beginning with L. So, for example, legal, illegal. IR before words beginning with R. So, for example, regular and irregular, like irregular verbs. And then we have IM that's usually seen before words beginning with M and P. So immortal, for example, or impossible, or impolite, and several more like that. However, even to these, there are exceptions. So, for example, you wouldn't say irreal, you would say unreal. Okay, but they are pretty good rules in general to follow, with just a few exceptions. Okay, so to go on to the prefixes that usually come with their own meaning, we've got a few over here. These are quite common ones. So ex meaning former, like ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. Re meaning again, so to redo something, to do it again. And then we have some opposites. You have a few of these like pro and anti. The examples I have here are pre and post. A lot of these letters actually come from Latin. So whenever we use prefixes and even suffixes, we generally make more Latin-based words, which are more formal in the English language. And so if you can use a few of them on the exam, this will look quite good. So to give you a couple of example words, with a football game, you could have a pre-match interview with the manager or a player, and a post-match interview with the manager or player. So an interview before the game and an interview after the game. All right. Now, the one I really wanted to highlight on the prefix side is the prefix out. Because I've discovered from my English teaching experience that this is not really taught that much, and you don't see it in many exercise books, which is quite surprising because it is a very important word and it's used quite often, or a very important prefix. Now, some people misunderstand this, and you're probably wondering why I have a tick and a cross next to these words. There's nothing wrong with the word outstanding, but it doesn't come into this particular prefix. So the prefix out is only used with verbs, okay? And outstanding here is an adjective, so it doesn't fall into the rule. So the prefix out means to better or have more than, okay? And I've got an example of the word outweigh, so to weigh more than. So let's say you're doing an IELTS writing. You could say in an argumentative essay that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. So there are more advantages than disadvantages. And we have many words like this. So outnumber, so to have a greater number than, outlast, outrun, outperform, so to run faster, to perform better. It's a very good prefix to know, and if you can drop it into the speaking exam, it will look very impressive. Okay, so on to suffixes. As we've said, these are letters added to the end of a word to change its form, okay? So we go into the whole world of word families. So I'll give you an example, actually, before we go into the one I've written. So I'll write this on the screen here. If you take the word argue, that is a verb, okay? Now, to change this into a noun, we need to drop the E and write ment. When you see ment on the end of a word, it's usually a noun, okay? So we can go one step further and we can change it to this word, which is an adjective. And we actually stress the third syllable, which is not very common in English. We pronounce this argumentative. Okay, a little bit of primary stress, but argumentative. And if someone is argumentative, it means someone who likes to argue. And I even just use this to describe an argumentative essay when you're making a particular argument in an essay. And this word ends in IVE, which is a common adjective ending. So you can see by learning suffixes and suffix endings, if you're not familiar with a word, you can look at it and usually take an educated guess about what form it has by looking at these final few letters. So IVE for adjectives, MENT, TION for nouns, and so on. Okay, so we'll just remove that. And let's take a look at how we break down a word family. We always break it down into 4 groups: nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs, okay? And I've explained these terms in previous videos. So we're taking the verb inherit. So to inherit something is maybe to receive something from perhaps a loved one who passed away, or even for other reasons. So the adjective of this is hereditary, and I've put a couple of extra lines where you stress this word. And in American English, you actually make this 5 syllables because they say hereditary, and we say terry like tree. So we only make it 4 syllables, hereditary. And this means like a hereditary condition. So if you inherit something from your parents, for example. Now, to go through these quickly, a physical inheritance can be like money because that is physical. Heritage is more abstract because it's not physical. So, for example, I'm English, but I also have Italian heritage, for example. And then personally, so we can say Prince William is the heir to the British throne. And it's a homophone with the word heir. Okay, so you don't pronounce the H. And then we have the less common word inherently. So let's say people in the south of England inherently vote Conservative, maybe because other members of their family have, or so on. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to word families. And that's all from me. So I hope these videos have been useful to you in your IELTS preparation. And if you're working on my website, we still have a few exercises left to do. And the final interactive task is going to focus on IELTS speaking part 3. So if you haven't seen my writing course already, you can go over to that and watch the videos and consider buying the course. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining me in these videos, and I hope to see you in another one again very soon.